Thank you for taking your time to join us on the real live streaming show, Lessons of Vietnam, where we strive to tell you the real story of the Vietnam War and the men and women who were involved. The show is broadcast from the studios of Nissan Communications, the home of several outstanding live streaming shows. You should check some of them out. Tonight's show is a modified version of a presentation I just did for the Division III Conference of Vietnam Veterans of America. I received many requests for copies of the show, so evidently a few people liked it anyway. Tonight's show is titled Vietnam War, Its Veterans and Its Legacy. I am concerned with just how history will remember the fine men and women who gave such superior effort to save the people of South Vietnam while being called vile names and treated so badly at home. Most of us went to war because our country asked or ordered us to. We were protecting those back home from communism. We thought we were. I will be asking you to reflect and even take part during and after the Vietnam War and its veterans and its legacy show. Back to the first page. Nope. Okay, I seem to be missing a slide there. The slide that which happens to me sometime, where I invite you to phone in at 919-518-9773 or come in on Skype, Computers 2K Voice, and take part of the show. Evidently, it got dropped, so don't worry about it. All right, so it's very, very important that you come in and make comments and questions or whatever you'd like to have, take the part of the show and give your opinion and so forth. Again, that's phone 919-518-9773 or Skype is Computers 2K, that is in kilo K, voice. Okay, my name is Bill Dixon, Vietnam vet, 67 to 68. Tet survivor. I was at Long Binh, 20 miles north of Saigon. Getting right into the show, why is it more important today than ever before to tell the real story of the Vietnam War and the men and women who were involved? Because of recent things in our communities and so forth, no event in American history is more misunderstood than the Vietnam War. It was misreported then. It is misreported now. That was by Richard M. Nixon in 1985. And if you know Richard Nixon said it had to be true. Okay. Television brought the brutality of war into the comfort of the living room. The Vietnam War was lost in the living rooms of America, not on the battlefields of Vietnam. Marshall McLuhan, 1975. Now, what legacy are we leaving? Are we leaving a legacy of baby killers? Are we leaving a lesson of psychotics? We will come back psychotic. Are we leaving a legacy of drugs? Or are we leaving a legacy of atrocities? What legacy, again, are we leaving? If you look at, you can go online and prove any one of these things up there as the gospel truth and the facts. For the vast majority of us, it was not the truth. Not the true facts and so forth. So just what legacy are we leaving? I still have problems with Ken Burns's piece that he did on the Vietnam War. I think he left more out than he needed to and said things that he didn't need to. So what will you leave behind? You probably haven't noticed. I know you Vietnam veterans out there haven't noticed, but whenever I stand in the mirror, I can't figure out why this old guy stands in front of me. If he'd get out of my way, I could look in the mirror. As we notice that some of y'all are getting a little older. We, as Vietnam veterans, have a responsibility to ourselves, those we lost since Vietnam as a result of the Vietnam War, to the men and women whose names are etched on the Vietnam Memorial Wall, our children, our grandchildren, and to all who follow, to tell the real story of our war. Again, what legacy will we leave behind? Baby killer, druggie, psychotic murderer, or an American soldier who did all his country would allow to help the people of South Vietnam be free? It's all up to you and me. The facts. You know, there's a lot of facts out there, especially if you go online. Everybody's got their own set of facts, which I have not quite figured out yet. There was something else supposed to pop up there, but it didn't pop up there. There it goes. I guess I'm going too fast. It seems everything about the United States involvement in the country of Vietnam is wrought with controversy, misunderstandings, and outright lies. I involvement before we got involved. See, a lot of people don't realize that we were paying during the when the French were in Vietnam, we were paying for about 70% or more of the money that the French needed to fight the war. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, the 1968 Tet Offensive, the American and Allied troop withdrawal, the fall of Saigon, the boat people, the Vietnam Memorial Wall, atrocities. Now, those of you who have been out there dedicated watching this show, you can answer a lot of these questions and know where some of the myths and so forth are. Even among Vietnam veterans, it's difficult to get a consensus of the war. 15 years of war, 1 year at a time. Different years, different branches of service, units assigned to, jobs done within those units, locations in Vietnam. We all have our own unique story. Now, there's basically several things that all Vietnam veterans have in common. When that plane door opened up and the heat and the humidity and the smells came in, they're going, this ain't like it was at home. That is probably the biggest thing that we all have in common. But it depended on, as you see the gentleman there saluting, he was with the first Cav. The man standing at the wall, the guy standing together, the black and white soldiers standing together. We were the first totally integrated war. If you were in infantry or if you were in supply, if you were a different phase of interest, you could have been airborne, you could have been all this. Everyone's story is different from the day they walked off that plane in Vietnam. So it's been very difficult to get a real consensus because we all spent our year and the guy who took our place has a completely different story. Although both popular imagination and academic research on the Vietnam War continues to flourish, there is no consensus in sight. Only the U.S. Civil War rivals the power of the Vietnam War divide and inflamed generations upon generations of Americans. Andreas W. Dom, quote, historians, academics, documentaries, books, and films all take their agendas, biases, preconceived ideas, and put together their own definitive accounting of the American war in Vietnam and those who were involved. So, okay. What we're talking about, the American people today have acquired their own beliefs about the Vietnam War and those who fought in it due to the movies and books they have exposed to. There's been a lot of movies out there. One example I'm going to give you is Bat 21, the real story and the movie. I enjoyed the movie a whole lot. I didn't have anything to do with each other. The only two people in the real story and in the movie was Clark, who was the bird dog pilot, and Hamilton, who was the colonel that was shot down. Even those who serve sometimes find themselves stating the myths and misunderstanding as truths. It's like on the way over here, I bought a tape this weekend on Vietnam music, and I listened to it on the way over here. And its name of the song must have been 19, because they said that over and over again. And they said the average age of the Vietnam veteran was 19, where the truth was it was 22. We all are allowed to have our own opinions in the United States because we're supposed to be free. We went to war and fought, so we all have our own opinions, but we don't necessarily all have our own facts. Facts are facts. But then facts can be confusing. What you believe becomes your truths. Okay. Oh, okay. I got to slow down so these things come up. I didn't realize they were not going to be that pop up like that. Okay, let's see what we got to talk about next. Now, I'm not calling Vietnam veterans mules, but I grew up in North Carolina putting in tobacco, and I used to drive mules with tobacco trucks, and mules have a tendency to be skittish, so you put these little blinders on so they can't see what's going on around them. And that's what I'm talking about here. Most of us were not privy to the big picture. You know, the generals never said, Private Dixon, how about sit down and let me tell you and explain to you what's going on in this briefing. They never did that. I kept waiting for it. We may have known where we were on a particular day, And I can't even say that because a lot of times I didn't have any idea where I was because the lieutenant was telling me where to go. He told me where to go, and he didn't tell me where it was when I got there. Most of us knew what we were doing at that particular place. That I did know what I was doing, but I just didn't know what that particular place was, but not what was going on in other places. So, we only knew what we were that day. For most of us, our job was to survive our tours and come home. As I told you before, and my wife told me if I went to Vietnam and got killed, she'd kill me. So my job was to come home. Most of us could care less about the politics of the war as long as we got food, ammunition, medical care, and mail from home. Those were the important things to us there. The politics, most of us didn't think about one way or the other. Now let's look at the timeline there. 1945, Ho Chi Minh declares Vietnam's independence. In 1956, the French leave Vietnam. And in 1960, Kennedy is elected president. And somewhere in that between 56 and 60, we started to send in more and more advisors, as they call them, non-combatants. And I have an idea that you tell him any of them they were non-combatant, they're going to hit you in the mouth. Gulf of Tonkin was 1964. So most of us did a 1-year tour of duty in a 15-year war, so our knowledge was at a given place or places. Units that we're assigned to in our job within that unit. So most of us had a 1-year out of 15-year experience, limited to our particular assignment, location, and country, and the rumors of what was going on in other places. Now, I repeated that from the last slide because I want to make sure everybody understood that you were there a year. The war was moving on. Things were moving on. Things were changing daily. So we knew about the war, where we were that day, but we didn't know what was going on. I was in 3 Corps. I didn't know what was going on in 2 Corps, 1 Corps, or 4 Corps. I didn't really care, just as long as my mail got there. The government. Everybody loves the government. When the people who ran the war can't come up with a consensus of something you would think would be simple, like how the Vietnam War was fought, the day it was started, who was first, it's hard to understand. It's not that hard to understand why there's a lot of confusion out there. Historians or academics all expect to agree on something. Vietnam Veterans of America's magazine, The Veteran, had a fantastic article by Mark Leibson discussing what is the official date of the start of the American involvement in the Vietnam War. When do you believe the Vietnam War started with America involved in it? Okay. United States involvement in Vietnam. These are the dates the United States government uses as the day. Between January 1st, 1960 to 1975, dates of the Vietnam Service Medal, nothing of any significance happened that day. Now, eventually, there's going to be a pop-up on your screen there, a Vietnam Service ribbon that's going to have 1960 on it. That's not the one, but it'll be there eventually. That's Americans fighting. There it is, 1960. And that was the only thing significant that day was they put 1960 on that ribbon. Nothing else of any importance happened that day. So I'm not quite certain why they picked that day. February 28th, 1961 through 1975 was the first day of involvement by the Americans in Vietnam, because that's using the Vietnam Era Veterans Readjustment Assistance Act of 1974. That's where they decided that there were 2 types of soldiers in America that day. There were Vietnam veterans and the Vietnam Era veterans. And it all comes down to supposedly benefits. So now we got February 28, 1961 as the date. But then we also have January 9th, 1962 to May 7th, 1975, which is used by the Department of Veterans Affairs to set a date for Agent Orange exposure compensation. Okay, so that was, and then August 5th, 1964 to May 7th, 1975, the Vietnam Era Veterans Readjustment Act. It defined Vietnam Era veterans and its date of the Gulf of Tonkin incident. So that was supposed to be the day that we got involved because of the Gulf of Tonkin, but we had several days before. Now, November 1st, 1955 to May 17th, 1975. Dates for the Pentagon's 50th anniversary commemoration. This is also the date the Military Assistance Advisory Group which is known as MACV, began operations in Vietnam. Now, this is the date that the Pentagon has decided that we're going to celebrate our 50th year commemoration, and a lot of different things going on all across the country. Saigon fell on March 30th, 1975, but the Mayaquez incident was May 7th, 1975, and those 40 names are etched on the memorial wall. So the Vietnam War did not end when Saigon fell. It actually ended a few months later in Cambodia. Let me say that for you again. The Vietnam War did not, according to this, did not end with the fall of Saigon in Vietnam. The Vietnam War ended in Cambodia on May 7th, 1975, when Gerald Ford sent the Marines in to rescue the 31 sailors captured. See how it can get kind of confusing? The Vietnam War ended in Cambodia. Okay, moving right along. Now, this one, you're going to have to write this down because this one really gets confusing here. But I'll try to go slow enough for you to keep up with it. On September 26, 1945, A. Peter Duryea was killed in Vietnam, becoming the first American casualty in what would become the Vietnam War. America's first casualty in Vietnam was a mistake. I think any casualty is a mistake, but he was an Army officer and a member of the Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner of today's CIA. Duryea arrived in Vietnam 2 days after Japan surrendered on September 2nd, 1945. His assignment was to help search for MIAs and to assist the English general who had just arrived in Saigon in maintaining order in the southern half of Vietnam. Okay, don't forget Duryea. We're going to keep right on going. Okay. He quickly fell out of favor with the English general, who managed to get Duryea recalled to Washington. Just before Duryea left for Saigon Airport to head home, he filled his last report on Vietnam. Although Duryea's final report was received in Washington, he never made it home. He was ambushed on the way to the airport by Viet Minh, the precursor to the Viet Cong, soldiers who mistook him for a French officer. Duryea not only became the first American post-World War II casualty of Vietnam, but also was the first MIA there, as well as his body was never recovered. Nor is he listed on the Vietnam Memorial Wall. Okay, so that was 1956, I believe we said, 54, yeah. The French was defeated on Dien Bien Phu, March 13th, 1954. The United States was not officially involved, but was financing 70+% of the French effort against the Viet Minh, and we also were dropping, our airplanes were also dropping equipment and so forth. And President Eisenhower did offer the French some nuclear weapons to drop around Dien Bien Phu if necessary, but the French just didn't want to get involved in that. After the French defeat, France signed the 1954 Geneva Accords, which led to its withdrawal from French Indochina and the separation of Vietnam at the 17th parallel into North and South Vietnam. However, a second Indochina War began in 1956, which would include American forces and would eventually escalate into the Vietnam War. So now we're saying that the second Indochina War began in 1956. Technical Sergeant Richard Bernard Fitzgibbon Jr., United States Air Force, was the first American to lose his life in conflict that would later become known as the Vietnam War. Forget Duryea for a minute. We're going to now talk about another first, Richard Bernard Fitzgibbon. He was murdered by another airman and died of his wounds later on June 8, 1956. Duryea was killed September 26, 1945. He was the first up until Richard Bernhardt became the first on June 8th, and so forth, in 56. In 45, Duryea was killed in 45, okay. Through the efforts of his sister and former select woman, Fitzgibbon's name was added to the Vietnam Memorial on Memorial Day in May of 1999. Following in his father's footsteps, Richard B. Fitzgibbon III joined the United States Marine Corps and also later served in Vietnam. He was killed in Vietnam, September 1965, whose name is on the wall. Fitzgibbon's is on the wall, but it's on line like 52, I think, or something like that. Okay. Now, on 22nd December, I know y'all are keeping up with this. On 22nd December 1961, James T. Davis with the Army Security Agency, ASA, received orders to lead a Vietnamese team to an area approximately 12 miles from the base in an effort to locate a Viet Cong guerrilla force operating in the area. The base being Thompson Air Base, which was at that time just outside of Saigon. They would move by truck into the area and set up. Initially, the operation appeared to be routine. However, 10 miles outside the base, near a former French garrison, the hunters became the hunted. The truck carrying the team hit a strategically placed landmine. So now we can say that was one of their first IEDs. Was forced off the road. The group immediately came under attack. Davis and the men fought bravely, but eventually succumbed to enemy fire. Davis was not actually the first American to lose his life in combat in Vietnam, but apparently President Lyndon Johnson, in a speech made years later, referred to Specialist 4 James T. Davis as the first American, and now several websites refer to Davis this way. In any event, he was one of the first, and 2 weeks after his death, in tribute to Davis' services and sacrifice, his unit headquarters at Thompson would be named Davis Station. Now, if we sit here long enough, Davis Station, there it is right there, popped up. It's amazing. I got to quit playing with this series here. I got to quit playing with it, okay? But that's Davis Station, and there's a lot of people still think Davis Station was named because he was one of the first, but he was one of the first, but he wasn't the first. Who was the first? You're going to have to decide who was the first. Okay. Now, let's find out who's the first. On September 26, 1945, A. Peter Duryea was killed in Vietnam, becoming the first American casualty in what would become the Vietnam War, not listed on the wall. Technical Sergeant Richard Bernard Fitzgibbon Jr., United States Air Force, on June 8, 1956, was the first American to lose his life in the conflict that would later become known as the Vietnam War. Fitzgibbon Jr. is on the wall at panel 52E, line 21. In other words, they couldn't get him close to his date. But the wall starts in 1959, and he's 1956. Okay. So which one of those two are you're going to call the first? And then there's President Lyndon Johnson in a speech referred to Specialist 4 James T. Davis as killed in action on 22nd December 1961 as the first American. And now several websites refer to Davis this way. He's on panel 1E, line 04. But the first hostile action losses were two members of an Army advisory team, Major Dale Buis of Pender, Nevada, and Master Sergeant Chester M. Avnan. Now, remember Avnan, because we're going to get into that in just a second, of Copperas Cove, Texas, been there, lived there for a little while, were killed along with two armed security guards in a VC raid on the team's Benoit headquarters on 8th of July, 1959. Remember Avnard. We'll come back Avnan. Panel 1E of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Casualty date says 10/21/1957 through 6/6/1965, even though the thing there says 1959. Avnan's name is misspelled on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial as Chester N. Avnard, but it appears correctly further down on the memorial. Chester was also widely known as Charles amongst his great many friends and family. So he is actually listed on the wall twice, once with a misspelled name and once with the correct name. But they got him right eventually, I think. So you decide that which one's first.
This is better than who's on first.
Yeah, this is, those of you out here too young, you need to find Albert and Costello does a thing called Who's on First, and you will thoroughly enjoy it. It's almost as good as this, Who's on First, okay? Now, the East Wall, November 25th, 1957 to May 25th. Those are names on the wall. They start 10/21, 1957 and end in 6/6, 1965. The panels of the wall, for those of you out there who don't know, the panels of the wall are by date of casualty. So the war started now here the wall says it started in 1959. The wall etch date starts at 1959, but the names start at 1956. So even there's a confusion on the wall, who was first and so forth, okay? Now, let's talk about some of the confusion. The history of the American Vietnam War has troubles with its dates and who died for this country first. The same challenge has been carried forth on other issues with the confusion of whom, what, and when. Who is the longest held POW of the American Vietnam War? Who is buried in Grant's tomb? I think Grant, I don't mind certain Grant's in there. Who is buried in a tomb unknown at Arlington National Cemetery from the Vietnam War? Those are all questions that go, The Gulf of Tonkin incident. What really happened? Since it was used as the catalyst for getting the United States officially boots on the ground involved in Vietnam, shouldn't history tell the real story? The myth that free elections were agreed to at the peace talks and that the United States and South Vietnam were afraid if they were held, Ho Chi Minh would have won handily. That is a big myth out there that is well held by so many Vietnam veterans. The real story behind the Cooper-Chase Amendment that guaranteed the communist victory over South Vietnam. Let's talk about who was the first POW. Lieutenant Commander Everett Alvarez Jr. was shot down and captured August 5th, 1964. On the first raid in North Vietnam in retaliation for the North Vietnamese torpedo attack on the U.S. destroyer Maddox and USS Turner Joy. This was called the Gulf of Tonkin incident of 4th of August, 1964. The real Gulf of Tonkin incident that kind of happened was August 2nd, I believe, is when the American ships fired upon gunboats and so forth. But then there was supposedly another attack on the 4th and another one on the 7th. Lieutenant Commander Alvarez was the longest held POW in North Vietnam. Now, that's not my words. I just copied it from history. He was a prisoner for 8.5 years. Okay. Wrong information. Navy pilot Everett Alvarez Jr. had been shot down in August 1964 during a U.S. reprisal raid after the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which didn't happen. Considered by many the de facto start of the war. And Alvarez says, I had become something of a freakish legend. Alvarez would later write, after all, the periods of my captivity spanned the entire length of this undeclared war. Okay. For those locked up with him, Alvarez was living proof it was possible to maintain military discipline and hold on to faith and someday make it home. He gave all the other prisoners hope. Now, Alvarez was held in Hanoi Hilton and some of the other prisoner of war camps around Hanoi. However, as the prisoners were preparing to be released, word came down in 1973 when all the prisoners were released. As word came down, hey, tell Ev, there's a guy here that brought up from South Vietnam who's been held longer than Alvarez, another prisoner said. His name is Jim Thompson. Alvarez had read about Thompson being held in the South years earlier and wondered whether anyone could survive in such conditions. His reply biography, he says, I'll be damned. U.S. Army Special Forces Captain Floyd James, Jim Thompson, went to Vietnam in December of 1963. Before his deployment, he had never heard of Vietnam. His assignment was to serve a 6-month tour of duty. Let me read that again. His assignment was to serve a 6-month tour of duty. He was in the back seat of an airplane, which we will talk about in just a minute. He was captured on March 26, 1964. He was released on March 16, 1973. 10 days short of 9 years. That was a long 6 months assignment. On March 26, 1964, Thompson was a passenger on an observation plane in 01 Bird Dog. These guys' job was to fly real low and get shot at so they could call in the big guys. The Bird Dog was flown by Captain Richard L. Whitesides when it was down by enemy small arms fire about 20 kilometers from Thompson Special Forces camp near Quang Tri, which was up in I Corps, right close to the DMZ, South Vietnam. Thompson survived the crash with burns, a bullet wound across his cheek, and a broken back. Thompson was quickly captured by the Viet Cong. Whitesides was not found. An aerial search and ground patrols failed to find any trace of the aircraft. Now, Thompson was held in the tiger cages of South Vietnam. That's the bird dog that he was flying, his little Piper Cub. They don't have guns to fire back. They can shoot rockets a lot of times to show where the bad guys are so the airplanes can come down. But that's how Thompson. Jim Thompson spent the next 9 years, 3,278 days as a prisoner of war, first as a prisoner of the Viet Cong in the jungles of South Vietnam. In June of 1967, he was moved to the Hanoi prison system. During his captivity, he was tortured, starved, and isolated from other American POWs. Thompson did not speak to another American for over 5 years. That's his book. As always, I'm going to highly recommend you get the book. He talks about what, when he was captured, what kept him going was the love of his family and his children. And little did he know that his wife was less than faithful to him. She was doing other things and told the Pentagon that she did not want the word that he was a prisoner of war to get out, which is probably one of the reasons Alvarez was known and he was not. When he came home, he found out that she was still living with another soldier and basically spent all the money that he had that should have been his. So he had a pretty rough life when he came home. But that's Jim Thompson, the real first American POW in the Vietnam War. Now, let's see if we can't create some more controversy. How many out there have been to Tomb of an Unknown Soldier, watching the guards walk? That is a special place. Is there remains of an unknown soldier from the Vietnam War interned in Tomb of an Unknown Soldier? And if so, do we know his name? Now that kind of gives you the idea that maybe they buried remains of a Vietnam veteran in the Tomb of an Unknown Soldier, but just might known who he was. Let's look at the story and see if we can figure out what's going on here. Oops, no remains now. Okay, I told my secret. Every soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine knows that if they are killed in combat, somebody will find them and their remains and bring them home. Here rests in honored glory an American soldier known but to God. The Vietnam War unknown. For many years, the White House and veterans organizations had been pressuring the remains lab in Hawaii to find an unknown soldier from the Vietnam War. 2 months before, in 1984, the Memorial Day burial date, Army headquarters and the Pentagon took steps to make sure the selected remains destined for Arlington would never be identified. In other words, hey, we need a body, we need some remains, we're going to have a ceremony, and it's up to y'all to get some remains, and we don't care who you get, but get some remains. So the guys at the identification place had to come up with remains because they were ordered and so forth. But all laboratory documents associated with the selection process were ordered destroyed, as were the crash site artifacts. These consisted of a pilot's body, 6 bones with ID card, 1 beacon radio, 2 compasses, an American flag, a parachute, a rubber raft, parts of a holster and flight suit, and a wallet with photos of the pilot's family. They were all put in the casket with him because he had to remain unknown to go to the tomb of the unknown soldier. President Ronald Reagan, and I misspelled Ronald, okay? Sorry about that. Who knew nothing about any of this, at the ceremony for the Vietnam War unknown, says, "Today, we pause to embrace him and all who served so well in war, whose end offered no parades, no flags, and so little thanks," said President Ronald Reagan. at the burial ceremony of the unknown. I did spell his name right there, so I get half credit. Reagan assured the families of soldiers missing in action that the effort to find their loved ones would not end. We write no last chapters, he said. We close no books. We put away no final memories. That's him placing the Medal of Honor on the casket, which is another controversy. Placing the Medal of Honor on the flag-draped casket, the president said his final emotional farewell. Thank you, dear son, and may God cradle you in his loving arms. In 1994, Patricia Blasi, I think it's Blasi, who was a captain in the Air Force when she received a phone call from Ted Sampley of Kinston, North Carolina. The former Green Beret told her he had just written an article for the Vietnam Veterans newsletter that he published, proving that her brother was buried in the tomb of the unknown. Now, you know that had to shock her and confuse her like everybody else. Sampley explained to her that he had recently read a book about investigating wartime plane crashes. The book talked about one of the few sets of remains after the Vietnam War was once believed to be those of an Air Force pilot shot down in 1972. By the way, that is a picture of Lieutenant Blasi is in it with his airplane. He went on to tell her how he had researched through military records, eliminating each missing pilot who went down in the same area as her brother. So there was nobody left but her brother. On May 11th, 1972, Air Force Lieutenant Michael Blasi took off from Ben Ware Air Base, South Vietnam. He had arrived in Vietnam less than 4 months earlier and had already flown 130 combat missions. Shortly after starting his initial run on an artillery position outside of An Loc, his plane was hit by a burst of tracers and he began streaming fuel. The plane flew a short distance and slowly rolled over and exploded on impact in communist-held territory. Nearly 6 months after Blasi's plane was shot down, a South Vietnamese Army patrol located the crash site. A short distance away, it made another discovery reported in a radio log. One U.S. pilot's body with ID card. First Lieutenant Blasi, Michael, Joseph, and one beacon radio, 2 compasses, and 1 U.S. flag, and 1 parachute. A rubber raft, portions of a holster, and a flight suit were also found. The body consisted of 6 bone fragments. Along with the personal belongings recovered was a wallet. Inside was a photograph of the Blasi family, and that is the photograph. That is a copy of the photograph. Blasi's family in St. Louis was never informed by the military that the wreckage of his plane had been located or that remains were recovered. The same remains that were stored at the Army Central Identification Laboratory in Hawaii, which became the unknown's remains. The unknown known remains. Patricia Blasi, Michael's sister, listened to Sampley with confusion and disbelief. It couldn't be true. She presented the information to the Air Force Casualty Office, where she was assured, spent all this money on my eyes, my mouth don't work, heard that there was nothing on file to support Sampley's statements. That's because they put it all in a casket. Ted Sampley had a reputation within some government agencies as a troublemaker, and the Pentagon used this to discredit his story. Yes, he was a troublemaker to the Pentagon and some of the government places. Blasi family accepted the Air Force and Pentagon statements as they could not imagine the government burying a known soldier in the tomb of the unknowns and not telling the family. A CBS correspondent, Vince Gonzales, in 1997, came across the Vietnam unknown soldier and can be identified, written by Sampley. He spent the several months on his own time collecting documents through the Freedom of Information Act. And he also talked with Sampley quite a bit. After he concluded his research, he contacted the Blasi family. Gonzales showed them his paper trail leading to Arlington Cemetery and a folder of information about the selection process and information that the Pentagon had ordered to be destroyed. Initially, the Blasi family had mixed feelings about having the unknown and remains removed or leaving things as they were. Which way to go? After hours of discussion, Jean, Michael's mother, said, for 26 years, we have been told that Michael was never found. Yet he was found 5 months after he was shot down and then buried without our knowledge in the tomb of the unknown. I want to bring my son home. Tests were performed in the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. The results showed a perfect match with DNA samples provided by the Blasi's family and his older sister, Judy. The Institute scientists also reported that when the casket was opened, they found the crash site artifacts that Central Identification Laboratory had put inside 14 years before. And there they are taking his casket out of the tomb of the unknown. Lieutenant Michael Joseph Blasi's final homecoming was at Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery, St. Louis. As the casket was carried by an Air Force color guard to the grave site, 4 low-flying F-15s flew overhead and rendered the missing man salute. However, the Medal of Honor presented at the tomb of the unknown soldier at Michael Blasi's interment as the unknown was retained by the tomb. The government says, and the Pentagon said, that the Medal of Honor was to honor the tomb of the unknown soldier, not the remains of the unknown in the tomb. Now, see, that's not necessarily a first, but then maybe it is. I hope it's the first. I hope it's the first unknown that was known. I hope that World War II, Korea, and so forth don't have known remains in there. Now, let's talk about some more confusing first. For action this day in the Iron Triangle, northwest of Saigon, on November 8, 1965, Specialist 5 Lawrence Jule, a medic with the 1st Battalion, 503rd Airborne Infantry, 131, I got completely tongue-tied there, honor, 173rd Airborne earns the Medal of Honor. Now, some of you may have heard the song 8th of November by Big and Rich, written about Niles Harris. Specialist 5 Lawrence Jule, who has, in that picture, he is a Specialist 6 in the picture, but when he was at 8th of November, he was a 5. He saved a bunch of their lives. It's a good story. He's from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. When his unit was outnumbered and attacked by enemy forces, Specialist Jule, who suffered a severe leg wound in early stages of the battle, continued to administer aid to his wounded comrades. Wounded a second time with a bullet lodged deep in his lungs, Jule continued to treat the wounded, completely disregarding the battle raging around him and his own safety. Even after the 24-hour battle had subsided, Jule continued to treat and comfort the wounded until his own evacuation was ordered. There's Lyndon Johnson giving him the Medal of Honor. You can see it hanging around his neck. Now, we just got through saying that he was the first African-American to win the Medal of Honor since the Spanish-American War. Let's look at this. Milton Lee Olive III, November 7th, 1946, when he was born, to October 22nd, 1965. Now, on my calendar, October comes before November. He was a United States Army soldier and a recipient of America's highest military decoration, the Medal of Honor for his actions in the Vietnam War. At the age of 18, Olive sacrificed his life to save others by smothering a live grenade. He was the first African-American Medal of Honor recipient of the Vietnam War. See the confusion? If the government can't get, how do historians and other people get it right? Olive, as a PFC in Company B of the 2nd Battalion Airborne, 503rd Infantry Regiment, 173rd Airborne in Vietnam, both of them 173rd, on October 22nd, 1965, while moving through the jungle with 4 fellow soldiers in Phu Quang, Olive sacrificed his life by smothering an enemy-thrown grenade with his body. For his actions on that day, he was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. I mean, you cannot emphasize how much this man gave his life for his fellow soldiers. And he was listed as the first. But is he the first that was posthumously killed? Where Lawrence Jule was the first who was alive Or was Lawrence Jule given the medal before, processed and given the medal before Ottawa was given the medal? Does it make a difference?
No.
The first is the first, and the first one was a month before Lawrence Jule. Not taking anything from Lawrence Jule, because his actions were just unbelievable. He saved a lot of men that day, a lot of men. But looks like there was somewhere along the line somebody could come up with who was first, who was second, and both of them should be well honored. Anyway, becoming the first living American was Lawrence Jule, since the Spanish-American War, to receive the nation's highest honor. Ottawa sacrificed his life to save others by smothering a live grenade. He was the first African-American Medal of Honor recipient of the Vietnam War. Both statements are somewhat true, but you can read that Lawrence Jule was the first, or you can read that Ottawa was the first. One received the Medal of Honor alive, one posthumously. Depending on a historian or researcher, finding only one of these stories, then the one could be written as a true story. Which one is the real true story? Both of them are true. Okay. We already talked about Davis. As we talked about earlier, the first ASA soldier to be killed on the battlefield in Vietnam was Specialist for James T. Davis from Livingston, Tennessee. He was killed on 22nd December 1961 on a road near the old French garrison of Cao Yang. He had been assigned to the 3rd Research Unit of Thompson Air Base. Davis stationed there at Thompson. It was named after him. He was not actually the first American to lose his life in combat, but apparently President Lyndon Johnson, in a speech made years later, referred to Specialist for James T. Davis as the first American. Basically, Johnson only knew what somebody said, and somebody probably said he was the first one from ASA to be killed. He was the first one from ASA. Now, the first American soldier killed in the Vietnam War was Air Force Techno Sergeant Richard B. Fitzgibbon, we've already talked about. He was listed as the United States Department of Defense as having a casualty date of June 8, 1956. See how things get in the history books and public opinion? President Lyndon B. Johnson said Davis was the first. He was reported this was incorrectly. But Fitzgibbon was not the first combat death. On 26, 1945, A. Peter Duryea, as we talked about, was killed, becoming the first American casualty in what would become the Vietnam War, not listed on the wall. The first hostile action were 2 members of an Army advisory team, Major Dale R. Lewis and Pender, Nevada, and Master Sergeant Chester M. Ovnan or Ovnard, depending on which way you want to pronounce it or spell it, was killed along with 2 ARVIs. That's the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, South Vietnam Security Guards, in a VC raid on Bien Hoa Air Base on 1959. It can get complicated. It all depends on who reads and how it read, and sometimes what they choose to repeat. Facts are good, but which fact? So even the facts, when you have the real facts, it's hard to come up with the facts, the real facts. I just recently came across this cartoon. Grandpa, we learned about the Vietnam War today in school. Shame on you. See, if you listen to a lot of history out there, we did commit atrocities every day, everywhere. We were baby killers, burning villages, raping women and killing old men, and come home crazy and so forth. So that would fit, and there's some books out there saying that. But as a Vietnam vet, I can tell you that was not the norm. The American soldier is probably better protecting children and civilians than any other military you'll ever find. And we protected the children whenever possible. There, the Viet Cong, the communists, murdered much, much more of their own people and used people, the children and so forth, as shields. Now, here's one of the books out there by a guy by the name of Nick Turse. I have tried to read this book several times, but I get so mad that I quit. I want to keep the book without tearing it up because, as you can see there, kill anything that moves. Based on classified documents and first-person interviews, a startling history of the American war on Vietnamese civilians. Winner of the Ridenow prize for reportorial distinction. Won a prize for this garbage. Americans have long been taught that events such as the notorious My Lai massacre were isolated incidents in the Vietnam War, carried out by just a few bad apples. But as award-winning journalist and historian Nick Turse demonstrates in this groundbreaking investigation, violence against Vietnamese non-combatants were not at all exceptional during the conflict. Rather, it was pervasive and systematic, the predictable consequences of official orders to kill anything that moves. Folks, I got to explain something to you. We talked about the war being 15 years. Almost 3 million people, Americans, served in the Vietnam War in country. Now, if it was kill anything that moves was the pervasive and systematic thing, there wouldn't be anybody left in Vietnam. The South Vietnamese people or boat people who came over here, who are now living here, would not be coming up almost daily to the American soldier and says, thank you for fighting for my country. Yes, it did happen. And it happened more than I think we want to admit, but it did happen, but it did not happen. 3 million people served in Vietnam over that 15-year period. There's no way it was systematic, predictable consequences, kill anything that moves. This is the kind of garbage out there that makes news.
It
This is
fake news is not.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. As you see, what really gets me, this is a student. You can go online and you can buy an essay. If you want to write an essay about his book, it's online. Let us write or edit the research paper on your topic, kill anything that moves. Let us write or edit the research paper on your topic. They're saying it's your research paper. We're going to do the research. Kill anything that moves. The real American war in Vietnam with a personal 20% discount. They're going to give you a 20% discount to cheat on your research. And there it is, the student share. You can see it right there. I copied it off. Kill anything that moves. The real war in Vietnam research paper. And there is the address to go online and get it. Kill anything that moves. The real American war in Vietnam. You know what, folks? I seem to have missed that part of the American war. But that's, fact or opinion. Everywhere is entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. But in the Vietnam War, even the facts are confusing. So it's hard to come up with your own community. Okay? Now, let's rewrite the classics. If you see right there, it says Huckleberry Finn, the N-word free, peace and war. Now about more peace. Moby, Private Parts by Herman Melville. And you all know what the Moby, okay, but now it's politically correct by Private Parts. Are we allowing history to be rewritten due to political correctness? How will the story of Vietnam War and the men and women who were involved that has already been rewritten be rewritten again by the PC police? See, here in Raleigh, North Carolina, we've been having some problems with the statues. This is not the ones here, but as you can see there, Lincoln had his eyes and face gouged out. But I love this one right here. This is a statue of Rocky. Tear down this statue that oppresses other boxers. If I was a boxer, to me, it looks like it's glorifying the sport of boxing. But somebody says, political correct person says, tear down that statue. It oppresses other boxers. Tear down the statues of Christopher Columbus. Does not go far enough. The entire District of Columbia must be removed. Now, I think a lot of people would agree that the District of Columbia needs to be removed, but not because it's named after Christopher Columbus. So, for my friends and fellow veterans, why is it so important today that the real stories of the Vietnam War and the men and women involved be studied and taught in schools today? This is why, as we've gone over, kill anything that moves. Look at these statues. The one at the top left is the three-man statue that's at the Washington with the wall. I call that the Ross Perot statue. These others, the third one over from the right is the North Carolina statue, but these are all different state statues. How long is it going to be before they're torn down? When is the politically correct people going to come in and look at the history of Nick Turse and said, kill anything that moves? When are they going to come in and read about melees that happen every day and going in, now we got to tear down the wall of these crazy Vietnam veterans, drugged out, came home, were dangerous, and so forth. When are they going to start on ours? Is it going to be another 50 years? Is it going to be another 75? Again, this is why we need to tell the real story of the Vietnam War and those who fought it. Which monuments are next? That is the Vietnam Memorial Wall and a picture of called Reflections. There's the wall, top right-hand corner, been dedicated by Jan Scruggs. And left corner is a replica of the Vietnam Wall that has been vandalized. The Vietnam Wall in D.C. has been vandalized several times. Just when is it going to stop? When is it going to be politically correct? When will this one be politically incorrect? Okay. Decisions. It's your legacy. I'm tired of talking right now to Vietnam veterans. It's your legacy, your choice. The myth, lies, misunderstandings, opinions in lieu of facts, or ignore the true history you leave behind. It's also out there by the general public. You can sit and think about it, and you can look at that picture and you get the idea where he's thinking about it. You can cry about it. You can make excuses about it, or realize that one person can make a difference and everyone should try. That was by John F. Kennedy. One person can make a difference. We got to make that decision. We're going to just let all these misfacts go, or we're going to get out and correct it for our children and our grandchildren and so forth. So how do we seasoned veterans and general public go about doing something about the legacy we leave? Don't like to talk about it. This, again, is for a lot of Vietnam veterans. Don't like to talk about the war. Get with some other veterans. They understand, and there is power and strength in the numbers. It amazes me, everybody who says, I don't like to talk about the war. They go back and reflect on the war every day. Every day they refight the Vietnam War. They don't want to talk about it. If they just get out there and tell their story and talk about it, it'd be amazing just how much it kind of lifts a burden on them. Be vigilant for incorrect information, as we've already talked about. Check it out. Don't just say that's wrong. You check it out and make sure you know. Consider and check out your source of information. Again, check it out. When you hear another Vietnam veteran or individual make incorrect statements, get with them later and tell them what you have found to be true and how they can verify the information. I wouldn't recommend you walk up to somebody and says, you don't know what you're talking about. This is what really happened. You may end up going to the hospital. So we don't want that to happen. But if you feel comfortable doing it, write a blog about your experiences. Schools and public and private settings are always, in private functions, are always looking for living history volunteers to visit classes. Keep in mind what and to whom you are talking to. No one wants to hear the bad stuff that you don't want to talk about anyway. Very seldom, and it's the middle school that have anybody ever asked me is how many I killed in Vietnam. I mean, a good comeback was, well, I don't know, but I haven't kept count. But are you applying? What do you talk about? Well, I talk about burning shit. That always gets them loosened up. How do you feel when you arrived in country? That's always good. But talk about when that plane door opened. Was it hot or smelly? Amen. What did you go? Did you join or were you drafted? What did you eat and where did you sleep and take a bath? Some of you went for weeks that didn't take a bath. What was your daily activity? Who were you assigned to and where? Did you burn shit or have other activities? Mosquitoes, leeches, jungles, animals, snakes, drinking water, your rat story. I know you got one. Agent Orange and all good subjects to talk about. Give your audience time to ask questions. Have a good time with it. But you can talk about all those things there and not get involved. World War II, the greatest generation. Take nothing away from them. The Vietnam invading is the greatest there has ever been. That by all rights should be our legacy, not that we fought and lost a questionable war. How could we have lost the war? We're not even there. The United States Congress lost the war to North Vietnam, Russia, China, and even Cuba with the Cooper-Chase Amendment. There was never a goal to win set in place or action to do so. We need to correct our legacy of uneducated, poverty-stricken, psychotic, drugged-out baby killers who came home and were dangerous to society. This is why the Vietnam War is important today. Is this the legacy you want to leave? That is a lady whose husband was killed, burning villages. There's a wounded soldier. I think he's smoking dope down here. The rallies in Washington, D.C., the little girl that was burned had nothing to do with us. The plane that was supposed to be on the American embassy where the Americans were escaping from Vietnam. First of all, that was not the American embassy, and that is not the Americans escaping there. That is a lot of the Vietnamese were trying to get out. So just what kind of legacy you want to leave? Is that the only legacy, or this legacy where we look out to people? This is the legacy where we built schools and hospitals and carried children, looked after children, built playgrounds even back then. This is the legacy, the real legacy of the Vietnam vet in Vietnam. And this is what we need to do. Or will our legacy be the American soldier fought with honor to allow our country and its people to live in a free country in a time of great turmoil and change in America? And they fought with honor. And it's our choice just how our legacy is going to be. Don't agree? What the legacy we discussed on this segment of Lessons of Vietnam is a possibility. It's your choice. But who would ever consider the national conversation on how to stop cow flatulence or doing away with cars and airplanes? How about gas eggs for cow food? In the early 50s, when I was in elementary school, one of my teachers said that water was a limited resource and one day we'll be buying it in bottles. I loved her, but I thought she was crazy. I thought she'd lost her ever-loving mind, to be exact. After all, just turn the faucet on or pump the pump and water was there. Water was everywhere. Now we buy waters in bottles. We buy waters in gallon jugs. Things changed. Things you didn't think was possible. Let's talk about why you feel the legacy as the popular stories of war in movies, online, and books don't matter. Let's do a show giving why you feel the Vietnam memorials will never be looked at in disdain and hate as the Civil War memorials are today. Come on the show. Let's do a show on it. I'd love to hear your side of it. Just why you think that won't ever happen. I'm very worried about our legacy. Thank you so much for joining the show. I hope you got some entertainment and value from it, and share the information with a friend. Our next show will be April 10th. By the way, Friday the 29th is now national recognized as Vietnam Veterans Day. From this Vietnam veteran to all Vietnam veterans tuning in, welcome home, brothers and sisters. There are several opportunities. I'm running a little bit over, but I'm going to tell you a little bit of things that are going on this weekend. A few events, 29th and 30th, if you're in the Triangle area of North Carolina, at the North Carolina History Museum in Raleigh, downtown. The Vietnam Experience, sponsored by North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated. There's no mission charge. That is Friday and Saturday. Helicopter will be there, all kinds of displays and so forth. Come get your grandkids pictures taken in a Huey helicopter with the Vietnam Experience. On March 29th, the Cary VFW 7383 and Humana are celebrating Vietnam Veterans Day with a dinner and a dance. Free admission at the Post Home at 722 Reedy Creek Road. Activities begin at 5:30. Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 530 in Durham, will be holding a ceremony at the Vietnam Memorial next to the Museum of Life Sciences in Durham. On April 1st, the North Carolina National Guard will be holding a Vietnam Veterans event at their headquarters off Reedy Creek Road in Raleigh. Event will be from 11 to 1 with free lunch. They wanted to hold it on the 29th, but there's so much stuff going, they moved it to the 1st. Look forward to seeing you in next. I can't believe April's going to be the next show. Have a good week, 2 weeks, and drive safely wherever you are, and good night.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.